Dear friends, welcome to another episode in the fantastic military world. In this video, we will talk about the visit of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to China in November 2022, a visit that we now know may have been decisive in preventing Vladimir Putin from launching a nuclear attack against Ukraine by the end of that year. In September 2022, to the world's surprise, Ukraine launched a surprise counteroffensive, initially focused on the Kharkiv Oblast, then extending through the Kherson Oblast, which resulted in just 2 months in the liberation of over 5,790 square miles of areas occupied by Russia, highlighting the important city of Kherson, the only oblast capital that Russia had captured in its invasion. During the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Russians were forced to retreat on various fronts, with some pro-Russian sources even fearing that if Ukraine had enough breath, it could expel Russia from even more occupied territories, leading Ukraine to approach Crimea, annexed by Putin in 2014. The proof that this offensive was worrying Russia came in the form of a flurry of nuclear threats made mainly by the former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, but also by Vladimir Putin, with both distributing close to a dozen threats of the use of nuclear weapons between September and November 2022. These threats, despite being terrible, were minimized by much of the world, which saw them just as a continuation of the already traditional Russian nuclear threats. However, an article newly released in March 2024 showed that Russia was indeed ready to launch nuclear weapons against Ukraine if the Ukrainian counteroffensive was strong enough to liberate more occupied territories. On November 2, 2022, a few days before the Ukrainian liberation of the city of Kherson, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz made an almost surprise visit to Xi Jinping in Beijing. Normally, major state visits are announced months in advance, but that trip by Scholz to China had been announced only 2 weeks before. And despite China and Germany having many issues to discuss in the economic and commercial area, the central theme of that visit was just one: the Russian nuclear threats against Ukraine. For a few hours, Scholz and Jinping were meeting behind closed doors, with both announcing the issuance of a joint statement of condemnation against the nuclear threats in Ukraine. Everything seemed to indicate that it had been just another joint note of condemnation, empty and powerless, like so many others. However, we now know that right after that meeting, Xi Jinping directly confronted Vladimir Putin. Obviously, we do not know exactly how this confrontation went and what terms were used, but various sources refer that Xi Jinping clearly and quite explicitly told Putin that the use of Russian nuclear weapons against Ukraine would not be tolerated by China, and that, if that happened, China would have no choice but to align itself with the bloc led by the United States in support of Ukraine. Although not officially, we know that China is the only major economic and commercial ally of Russia, and that despite the Chinese demanding discounts of more than 40% on the gas, oil, and fuel they buy from Russia, these Chinese purchases are still crucial for the maintenance of Putin's invasion effort in Ukraine. Therefore, if in response to a Russian nuclear attack against Ukraine, China completely cut off its ties with Russia, even going so far as to directly support the Ukrainian defensive effort, Russia would not only lose its only major economic and commercial ally, but would also gain a significant adversary in its invasion of Ukraine. And according to the article, all this Chinese effort to pressure Putin not to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine to stop a counteroffensive that, at that moment, seemed like it would continue until it approached Crimea, started in response to the pressure made by Olaf Scholz to Xi Jinping, a pressure that may have saved the lives of millions of Ukrainians and avoided the Third World War. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe and activate the notification bell to not miss any news, criticisms, ideas, or suggestions. You can leave them in the comments.